Hi, Natalia. Let's see.
Okay.
So Nelson, I see you in the chat room. You're okay if answering questions that anybody wants to submit by chat, you'll be standing by?
Yeah, for sure. I'll be looking at the, sorry, I was in a meeting right before this, so I just got it.
No problem.
Yeah, also, Nels, if you wanna jump in, if you think that everybody saying something really wrong.
George said he wouldn't save me. He just said I had to answer all the questions when I presented last. Oh.
Yeah, yeah, we've been doing this with this year with Nels. This actually is the only positive thing of online is that you can get your co-authors and you don't have to transmit the comments. It's like all.
Yeah, that's true.
You know.
Cool. So we'll get started in about a minute. This is let everybody get logged on. Okay, so should get started. So we're happy to have Ramondo, Global Innovation. Nels is in the chat room, so you can, if you have questions you'd like to have addressed in the chat room. But we encourage everybody to just unmute and jump in like you would in a regular seminar and ask questions. We'll leave the stream open for more comments and discussion afterwards. So otherwise, Natalia, you have an hour.
Okay, thank you very much. This is the first version, as you can see, and of this paper, and Nels is there. We have a research agenda together, and this paper is a follow-up of the first paper. So there's going to be some things that were on the other paper, and if you haven't seen it, I will take time to explain some of those. The other thing is, like, most of our related literature are in the room. So yeah. So this is a kind of shorter theoretical paper, and we want to make like a point that there is more information to be read from observable trade flows that are related to innovation and diffusion patterns. And this is when you use the lenses of a Ricardian model. So let me motivate this, what we see in the data. And this is the case of washing machines from the paper of Aaron Flaren of Taxel and Felix Dintelnot. And here you have some events where there was a big jump on tariffs on this particular good, anti-dumping tariffs in some cases, and then other type of tariff. And what you can see, there is no doubt that every time the price of washing machines increased for a given source, for instance, Korea, Mexico, there was a swing, a big substitutions toward, for instance, here towards China. And then in 2017, when we have the anti-dumping against China, there was this swing, these substitutions toward imported from, in this case, Thailand and Vietnam. So basically, why is this happening? Why we observe this substitution pattern? So we say, okay, maybe it's because, well, washing machines from these places are close substitutes because they share the same technology. So we see these substitutions toward these close competitors because there might be an underlying technology similarity. So in fact, the technology similarity is almost, it's there because it's the same multinational farm producing in all these places. So basically it's the same washing machine. It's even like the perfect is the same technology. So also another thing that is like in trade, we have many estimates of substitutions or cross-price substitution elasticity. Well, there is a hint here that maybe the word is not really CS, and there might be third-party effects that are very important. Of course, you can retrieve very formal estimations of this elasticity. The literature is rich on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to interpret these substitution patterns through the lenses of a Ricardian model, where, you know, in the Ricardian model, technology differences are the ones leading to trade. So if these substitutions in expenditures should reflect something about the similar or dissimilar technology that trading partners are using. And we're going to link this technology similarity, and when I say technology, I say productivity, is going to be the result of innovation and diffusion of ideas. So we're going to ask how do these innovations and diffusions shape trade substitution patterns. So basically, we're going to try to say something about an observable flows from variables that we can observe in the data and estimate. So let me tell you concretely what this is going to look like. This is going to be a Ricardian model of trade in the EK tradition and with knowledge flows. So the worldwide state of knowledge, let me use it, is the result of innovation and diffusion. That's what countries will do. So what we're going to, our structure, of course, I'm going to go in a lot of detail on that, will have two types of components. So ideas, the primitive object, is going to have a global component that we call quality, and a location-specific, location-time-specific components that we call applicability. So you can adopt an idea, apply it and use it for production in your country. There's going to be something different from the original idea. So this concept, this separability, will allow us to distinguish innovation from diffusion. And then the productivity or technological similarity will reflect this distribution of applicability across all these locations. It will reflect the distribution of this location time-specific component. Okay, so we're going to conclude that shared ideas lead to more similar technologies across locations. So here ideas are going to be specific to goods, but I'm going to be very clear about that. Then we're going to be the result of innovation and diffusion in our framework is going to be a productivity distribution that is max stable shared with a spatial correlation. And we introduced this subject. I'll talk a bit here about it in our previous work. So for instance, Sam and Jonathan econometrica, it's a special case, independence of these type of distributions. So what we show in our previous work is that instead of CS, we are going to get expenditure shares that are in the generalized extreme value class, the GEV class, that has very rich substitution patterns. So basically, when countries share technologies, have similar productivities, they're more fierce, or they have strong head-to-head competition. That's a core feature of Ricardian models, and then that will translate in more substitutability in expenditure. So that's kind of in a nutshell what our structure will take us. So for instance, this is going to be like the example of China versus Korea or Mexico, or versus Thailand and Vietnam. They're similar, so then they're going to compete more strongly. So when there is these changes in prices, consumers in the US will move toward those sources that are close substitutes. So, so as I hinted previously, the footprints of knowledge then, of these knowledge flows, could be traced in trade flows. And these are the kind of three results we get from the theory. So if you have a world with innovation only, an innovation only world, like productivity is going to be independent, and we're going to end up in CS. So if you observe non-CS patterns in the data of expenditure, that is a sign of correlation in productivity, and then that diffusion is happening in ideas that are kind of similar, okay? And then we're going to show that dynamics of these cross-price elasticities reflect knowledge diffusion only. So basically, if anything, is this cross-price elasticity that you can observe, that is the informative object, okay? So that's the roadmap also for the talk. So let me try to do some contact with the literature that are obvious contacts with all the literature that obtains PPFs that are free share. And these are results of innovation and knowledge diffusion, in particular, some 97 paper, and it's an innovation-only model that obtains independent free share using extreme value theory. So here we are going to, of course, relax the independence. We are going to use tools from max table processes. Okay, so but some things are going to sound similar to his work back then. Then in their work in 2001, they added trade, and that's why there's going to be independence in that work. Then they have the paper in 99. There's a paper with innovation and diffusion. This is going to be the closest paper to what we are going to show you today. We are going to add trade. Okay, so and the diffusion process they use in this paper, it can be one of the processes we could use. We are going to be a bit more general. Then we have a Paco and Ezra paper and the econometrica paper. They have innovation and diffusion happen via trade, via EK trade actually. So we won't have that. We won't have that diffusion happens through trade. There's going to be diffusion, and trade will reflect what happens with diffusion. And I'm going to point out the differences and why we think their framework leads to independent free share. And then there is the work by Anna Maria and co-authors that have the three elements we had, and they also end up in independent free share. But they are more interested in talking about, they have a multi-sector model, EK type model, so they are more interested about things related to comparative advantage. Again, I'm going to show you point out the differences. The literature is huge, but there are a couple of papers that have similar ideas, even if they are in very different contexts. So Chris and Jesse have a paper that there is innovation, diffusion, and trade, and there is some sort of foreign competition inducing more adoption. Thomas Sampson has also papers where diffusion and innovation shapes specialization. One thing that we share with the literature, Jesse Perla, Cristonetti, may have it too in their paper. These closed economies, they're closed economies, but they have this idea first that not only best ideas are up for adoption, you can sample from everywhere. And then I put this sentence in quotes because it kind of reflects, is the spirit of what is going on in our model too, that innovation stretches and adoption compresses the productivity distribution. So something similar is going to be here in our framework. Okay. So I'll start with the model. So we're going to have continuous time and a finite number of locations, script L. And each L is a labor market, okay? Think of a country for now. There is CS, demand, and there is a continuum of goods, D. Now, for now, because of notation mostly, assume there is frictionless trade. So I'm going to just keep track of the source country. So every subscript will be, the light goes on. And each country is going to be the source country, and there is a single destination market. So that we don't lose much about that, assuming that. Now, what are ideas here? So for each good, there's going to be an infinite number of ideas denoted by I. So these are countable, 1, 2, etc. So ideas are like blueprints to produce a good. Okay. They're specific to goods. So and that's something that differs from some of the work in the previous literature. And they're all the ideas. Okay, the ones in the past, the ones yet to be invented, they're all there. They need to be turned on. Okay. So as I said, each idea is this only labor constant return to scale production technology, the blueprint, and it has a component of non-rivalry. So any location can use it. So 2 locations can be used at the same time, right? But the locations may differ on how, in their ability to adopt the idea. So they can be somehow partially excludable. And productivity will be the result of adopting the best available idea. So the max for that particular good at time t, this location L will adopt the most efficient idea available to them. So now I want to talk about this object over here, the C wheel. So the efficiency of this idea, right? Idea I in this location L at time t, and applied to good V, it has 2 components, as I hinted in the introduction. So it has a component that is idea specific, and that we are going to call quality of the idea. And this is time invariant, and it's a global component. And then there's going to be this A component that is specific to the location that will, where the idea is available, and also is time specific. So it can change over time and over location. So think about this object, for instance, capturing barriers to adoption. In some places, ideas are more difficult to implement than in others, the same idea. In particular, we're going to be playing with this object, is our crucial variable, is if an idea is not known in a place, this applicability component is 0. Or say, to capture some ideas on the all growth literature, if a country does not have like the right human capital for that idea, also applicability will be 0 till they reach that. So this object is going to be changing over time due to innovation and diffusion. And we are going to define both of those flows through this A object. Okay. Any question?
Oh, Natalia, well, in the last bullet point, why wouldn't it only be changing over time due to diffusion? Because I thought you kind of separated the innovation part into the capital Q part. So then. Yeah,
I'll show you in a second. Next slide. So yes, this is going to be what we call diffusion. So first, let me define this is when an idea first arrives to a location L, is this TIL for that particular D is when this applicability turns positive in that location. But then there is like a discovery time. That is in the first place ever that this applicability turns positive, and that's going to be diffusion. Okay, so sorry, innovation. So innovation is the very first time applicability is positive for that particular idea in somewhere, and we are going to call that time T star, discovery time. That discovery place there is L star. Okay, so that's our definition of innovation. I'll show you in a second. There is going to be also the quality here coming, a Poisson assumption. Okay, so we assume also that when the idea pops up, it pops up in one place. Okay, so each idea has a unique discovery location. And the ideas will arrive to other locations. So if you observe the idea in two places, it's because it diffused from that original location. So only diffusion can create this sharing. Okay. So now going to some questions. We are going to have a Poisson arrival, Poisson assumption here. Okay. So if this turn on of ideas will happen at the Poisson, as a Poisson process, and the intensity of that process is going to be defined here, and there's going to be this lambda that is going to be the rate of arrivals of new ideas at that particular location, right? The discovery locations. And then if the expected number of ideas with quality above some threshold, right, that were discovered up till that moment T, is going to be given by this expression over here, where this big lambda is going to be all the expected number of ideas with quality above 1. Now,
so Natalia, I'm confused. I think similarly to Sam. When you go in, you have the Q and the A, and yeah. So when we talk about innovation, are we talking about Q's arriving or about A growing?
Q is going to arrive, and the A is going to be different from 0 for the first time.
Both of those.
Yeah.
So what's
But think about the Q being on the background, right? And then it pops up at this Poisson rate. So an idea, right? First time it arrives, the A turns positive. And the Q is going to be, well, this quality that it will turn out to be Pareto.
right? So, but you don't. But the two things happen. But would a special case be that the Qs are just always there, and the countries are just the A's just move to find them?
That's exactly what we're doing. The Qs are always there, and it's just there. It's like they're sitting under the ground, and when T star happens, somebody finds it under the ground. Okay,
so when we talk about this Poisson intensity, then it could all be about the A.
Yeah, it is. That's exactly it. It's the intensity with which people find ideas hidden in the ground.
Okay.
Sounds like cicadas.
Like what?
Yeah.
Cicadas.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This happens more often because time is continuing, not every 7 years. So yes, so each idea quality is going to be independent of the discovery time, and among ideas, okay, with quality above some threshold, quality is Pareto. Okay, so why I wanted to arrive here, this theta parameter is the one regulating the Pareto tail coefficient for quality. So remember, lower theta means fatter tail. So innovation can create very good ideas, higher theta, thinner tail, and this is going to be the shape parameter in the Frechet. Okay, so it's an important parameter that will regulate this correlation in productivity too. Okay, sorry, not correlation in productivity, will regulate the weights given to the quality, that is the common component, versus A, that is the location-specific component. But I'll show you precisely in a couple of slides when we're right there. So, okay, Poisson. Now diffusion. Let's define diffusion. So diffusion is going to be any change in this applicability variable A after discovery. Okay, so as I said, if you see two ideas in two different places, it has to be because they diffuse from the discovery place. So when we have non-shared ideas, it's because are only due to innovation, because it just happened in that place at that time. So we're going to impose only one restriction on the diffusion process. Conditional on the discovery and location time, applicability is going to be independent of quality, and it's going to be independent across ideas. And this is going to be an important assumption to get the max table Frechet later on. Okay. So what it means that these improvements in this A variable are as likely as for low or high quality ideas. And then it means also that we don't need to keep track of this joint distribution of quality and applicability. Okay. So let's see here. So clearly these two variables and these stochastic assumptions allows us to separate between innovation and diffusion. So innovation will have this history that is given by the Q, by the location and time of discovery. Okay, this is the history of innovation of idea, and diffusion is going to be the evolution of the joint distribution of these applicabilities over space, conditional on that history. So we need to keep track of that, and we call it this function F. That is, you see, it comes from the distribution of this A term over space, conditional of where the idea was born and when.
So when you
yeah.
Sorry, I keep interrupting. When you talk about the quality of the ideas, is that purely the Q, or is that some combination of the Q and the A where it's discovered?
Say it again. I missed the first part, sorry.
This quality of an idea, is that about the QIV by itself?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's possible to have some really fantastic idea, but the innovation may be not very good because the L star country A is pretty small.
For instance.
Yeah.
It can happen.
Yeah.
And then it goes to imagine the idea diffused to some other place that is very good.
And it jumps over.
Yeah. And I think Nels has the power loom example, right? For that type of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is there kind of a normalization that capital A maxes out at 1 or something like that?
No.
So the same idea can keep getting better through the applicability.
In principle.
So then what role does the Q play, the capital Q play, if the A can be anything?
This is going to give us, I guess, the common component in productivity, right? Now to have a
Yeah, it's what's going to make sure things are Frechet for the marginal distributions, basically.
Right, but
you got
without
that
any, okay, but the A is not restricted. Okay.
And then the other thing that's important here is so suppose the applicability is exactly the same everywhere, then everybody has the exact same productivity. So you're going to have perfect correlation. So it's the interplay between applicability
Right,
and the
okay.
queue that's going to generate the degree of similarity in productivity.
So what I'm going, just maybe to clarify, this is like it's a sufficient structure to get the max table pressure. Okay, so we need this separability, and again, A is very unrestricted in some sense, and it can capture. I mean, we are being very general. You can think of, I'll give you examples like, of course, putting structure on the A to get different models that we know of diffusion. Okay, so exponential diffusion, as you have in your previous paper, can be one case, for instance. So the object that we're going to be talking about, and is this measure of ideas with quality bigger than 1 and applicability below a number, a vector. So is this object M? Okay, so here what we're going to have, again, remember that innovation refers to the very first time this applicability turns a positive, and then diffusion is the evolution, reflects these changes in applicability, the distribution over space. So basically here, let me see. So we're going to have a unique discovery location for ideas. So you see here the sum. So we are going to have this separability across those locations. Okay. And then, well, we're going to follow up to moment T, what happened with the distribution of ideas that were born in the past. Okay, and we are going to follow how they are distributed in space, conditioned on where they were born and when. So this is again, this is a set for the assumptions we made before about the stochastic structure of A. It's a very general function, and we can accommodate many of the diffusion processes in the literature. So I'll give you examples in a bit, but we can talk later how it accommodates the one in the exponential diffusion.
So I forget what lambda star is.
Oh, this is the arrival of ideas, of new ideas is the Poisson, is the flow of new
Arrival
ideas.
rate, and it's
Yes.
a function of
Time.
okay, we're integrating over T star from the beginning of time till now, and over the L stars, okay, which are the discovery countries. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Here. Yeah. So now we are going to see how it evolves. Okay. So how this
Natalia?
measure. Yeah, George.
All these ideas just basically show up. There's no investment or anything that kind of creates these. So we're really just trying to.
Yeah. So let me, thanks. That's a good question now. So the model is going to be very mechanic. Okay. So, and the way we wrote it, we went back and forth with your question a lot. And we decided to go with what we call kind of, this is the minimum you need. I mean, then you can think about your favorite model of innovation, see how it, but we wanted to show what are the elements, where kind of with identification assumptions you need, if you wish, to get max table Frechet, and then read these flows on expenditure, or recover these flows from expenditure. So you will, everything is mechanic, like innovation is exogenous, there is nobody taking decisions about that. Diffusion also is all captured by this A, that you can think like are barriers to diffusions, or you can think like you need human capital to adopt, etc. Okay, but again, it's like kind of where are the objects, how they have to depend on time, locations, etc. So things work have this subsequent steps that I said. Okay, but yes, it's a very good question.
But so if we go back to like your motivation slide where there was this really sharp substitution across washing machine producers or locations, you're really just going to be thinking about like, why was that possible? Because these guys were so similar in technology.
Yeah, so basically these two places, say China and Vietnam, when it happened, they have the same technology. So from the consumer point of view, this is almost like it's a super high elasticity.
Yep.
So at the core of these models, that's why we're going Ricardian here, it's head-to-head competition. Okay, I know how to do the washing machine. You know how to do it. You might be, we're close competitors. We have very similar ideas. When the price change, you know, for me, they run to you. Okay, so but there is this idea of head-to-head competition. One thing that maybe people have in the background, because we talk about innovation, even if it's all mechanic, it's like there's going to be perfect competition. And the truth is that we're following, we are having more like an EK 2002 trade model, but you can think like you can have Bertrand, like the core part is the head-to-head, really, to have the effect. So diffusion will basically make head-to-head competition fiercer. It will make us closer substitute. Okay.
Yes.
So, so how does knowledge evolve over time? So it's going to capture by this m dot, that is the evolution of m in time. We can divide it and a part coming from innovation and one part coming from diffusion. Okay, so let's start by the innovation effect. So remember, ideas are born in only one place. So that unique discovery location here shows up as this separability across the places. And well, at time t, they're born, we are at time t, this is going to be, it's going to be, ideas are only concentrated there at that point. So this is going to be the marginal distribution in that particular discovery location, okay? It should be an L star here. So the diffusion effect is going to show how this F evolve in space, okay? So again, we're going to have this separability across discovery locations, right? That was but not across production locations. So two locations can share ideas after they are born. So we have this applicability that's spread. So we need to follow the evolution of this conditional distribution. Okay, so basically what's going to happen here, you can see these two effects. It's like innovation diffusion will augment the prevalence of these shared ideas, and innovation will reduce them. So there's going to be these two forces. So say it again, like innovation, we need to follow the evolution of the marginal distributions of applicability, and for diffusion, we need to follow the joint distribution conditional on the discovery time and location. So let me now, what I call taking stock. So what have been so far done? So I'll show you very parsimonious models, we believe, of adoption of ideas across locations. And ideas are available to places because of innovation and diffusion. And the key is this separability between the global and this time location specific component of an idea, particularly this applicability. So the global dynamics of knowledge is going to be captured by this M measure, and it will help us to distinguish between the contribution of innovation versus diffusion, and diffusion will allow ideas to be shared over space, but with limited access maybe, okay? Now, what are the consequences for productivity and expenditure? So what we're going to do now is to work with the productivity distribution and then expenditure, in terms of these primitives. So we're going to go to show a max stable multivariate Frechet for productivity, and that will lead to GEV expenditure. So what this structure will give us, again, and I think this is something that that if you like to work with EK type models, you appreciate this, like we're going to have closed form solutions. Okay, so this framework will give us closed form solutions for productivity and then expenditure, and we're going to characterize them in terms of these underlying primitives.
So Natalia, can I ask a question about this?
Mike,
hi. Tell David I'm working, but yeah. So like the Shea cleanout Noth paper, they presented it here a couple weeks ago. I mean, it has a similar flavor to it, but I don't think they don't have like a max stable Frechet distribution given the way they set that up. Is that a way to kind of distinguish? Because they have this very mechanical thing. I mean, I guess it's,
yeah.
I mean, it's, you know, ideas come and goods are destroyed, and
Okay.
you know, but they all have to do everything on the computer.
Yeah.
And that's a, do you know what I'm talking? Do you know the paper? I mean, you
No,
can
I
just
don't know, but
punch.
I thought I can answer like more generally. I mean, I think this one is like for all these type of papers, if you really don't care about closed form solutions, yes, this paper or our previous paper, you don't care, because I think like here really we are after that, and we are not after that because we like elegant models only. We're after that because it helps us a lot for identification purposes and to clearly distinguish where effects are coming from. But again, yes, so in fact, many of the examples I'm going to give you are going to be with Frechet, so I can very easily go from the primitive to the upper level of productivity and expenditure, just to make it simple. But for what you're telling me, I think that will be the main difference. I need to see all the details, but yeah. Many of these papers I think like Ana Maria's paper, for instance, that also they end up with independent Frechet. There is this subtle thing that diffusion occurs like across goods, across varieties. Okay, and that makes it different. Okay, so it won't increase head-to-head competition. Here is really, I think this idea is in Sam and Jonathan papers 99, that is specific to goods ideas, and that's what makes tightens up the head-to-head.
Yeah, I guess now I'm remembering what I thought was interesting about is they basically got, it was like as if the distributions were Frechet, but when you're initially closed, it's like you have a really large theta, so you don't have a very dispersed productivity distribution. But then the more you open up, it becomes like I have a more dispersed productivity distribution. And then Pete was making and that's kind of how I think about kind of some of the things you're saying. And then Pete was making a big deal about how that was really shaping the gains from trade. So yeah, I don't know, check it out. I mean, this is,
yeah, we'll check it out for sure. But yeah, here the diffusion will make everybody more similar, by the way. Okay, I need to think when you go to totally closed, because then you have to start thinking more carefully how diffusion happens within the country that we haven't kind of. It's not here the point, but yeah. Okay, let me show you, because what is that? First, what is a max stable multivariate Frechet productivity distribution? So you are going to have here something similar what you are used to. So this is going to be the joint distribution of productivity across locations. They're going to be characterized by the scales, but there's going to be this G function, right? That can be pretty general, I would say, that will give us correlation across space. And then you have the theta, that is the same theta you saw before for Poisson. So, so you don't have to, this is the proposition in the paper, And the proof uses tools from the max table processes. Here is where some will differ from your previous work. These tools are the ones that allows us to extend to max table Frechet with any correlation. So the scale will reflect the average applicability in a location, okay? And the correlation function is going to reflect this joint distribution of applicability, okay? So, but let me tell you more about this. I want to show you some examples, and this is material from the previous paper. So, for instance, if you are in the independent case, the G is additive, okay? So let me show you. So if productivity is independent, right, across locations, what you get is an additive G. Now you can think that other Gs, for instance, a CS, I'm going to use this one, that's why I'm showing you this one. We call it symmetric Frechet. So basically the aggregator is CS characterized by this raw parameter. So if the row is 0, you go back to independence. If you start having correlation across draws, across locations, sorry, go to 1, say, draws are the same everywhere. And then you can think of others. I'm not going to use this one today. It's like a cross nested, right? So it has like nests that can be sectors. And then you have within sectors, there is this sector-specific correlation, etc. Okay, but I'm going to be using going back and forth in my examples between these two. So, so what you need from this G, and this is all material from the previous paper, is homogeneity of degree 1 to get max stability. So max stability is the property that makes all the EK models work so nicely. Okay, so it's the property that tells you that if you take the max of Frechet, you get Frechet. But it also tells you that you can, because the conditional and unconditional distribution of the maximum is the same for Frechet, you can get that shares or probabilities are expenditure shares. Okay, and if I can talk more about that in the Q&A if you want me to show you. So basically, important part is that you get closed form expenditure shares with these distributions. Now, let me make a difference here, a remark. So the theta parameter will regulate the Pareto tail parameter in the Poisson, regulates productivity heterogeneity over the continuum of goods. The G regulates heterogeneity across location, okay? So in the independence case, why the theta was so important? Because it regulates both. There is only one parameter, okay? Now, so let me give you two examples. So one is no diffusion. So ideas never leave the discovery location. So what happened there is that this measure of ideas gets additive. Okay, so gets additive across locations, and this is the marginal distribution that I showed you before. Now, in that case, we use the results from the proposition. We can show that the productivity is independent. So the G function that we get is this additive function. Okay, so if we have this lack of shared ideas across locations plus these Poisson arrivals, right? And this is the result on innovation-only models that it takes 2001. So basically here, the takeaway is that diffusion is necessary to have some correlation in productivity. So this is innovation is a world where there is no shared ideas, basically. All the ideas never leave their discovery place. So let me make this comment about where overfill. I think Ezra is in the audience, but we can discuss it more in the Q&A. Their model leads to independence. After some thoughts, why? Because their model has diffusion, And one reason we came up with is because when countries sample productivities in other places, they update with there is a Pareto update. And then basically it's like drawing a new quality together with applicability. So basically in terms of our framework, it's like drawing a completely new idea. So in terms of our framework, ideas are never shared. That's why at the end you have this independent productivity even in their framework. But I stop there. We can talk more later. I'm running out of time. So let me show you this other example that I think is very it's important to fix ideas. So this is what I call all or nothing diffusion. Or either ideas are in the place where we're discovered, or they diffuse and everybody knows them. Okay. And let me make another assumption that there is, if it's known, if it is known, the applicability is an independent unit for shape with shape sigma. Okay, and sigma has to be less fat tail than quality. Okay, so this case will show that diffusion won't be sufficient for correlation in productivity. So the measure of ideas in this case will have two parts: non-share ideas and the ones for share ideas. Okay, and this delta just it's notation from the fraction of ideas that are innovated in a start place and that already diffused to the rest of the world. So when things diffuse, we're going to have more weight over here. So the productivity distribution coming from this type of work also will reflect this share non-share parts, and it's going to be a sort of a convex combination between the independence case here and this symmetric correlation that I just showed you. So it's going to oscillate between those two depending on how fast this delta happens and the magnitude of this rho. So this rho is the degree of correlation, and it's going to reflect these primitive parameters theta and sigma. So how fat tail quality is with respect to sigma. So rho is here 1 minus theta over sigma. So let me show you extreme examples. So imagine if there is no diffusion, so delta is 0, go back to independence. Okay, so we need diffusion. So if we have instance diffusion, right, we are left with this part. So we get symmetric correlation. Actually, this is the case of multinationals that we have with Andres in our paper. But now the rho is coming from this theta over sigma here. So if sigma goes to theta, meaning that applicability is as fat tail as quality. So every time you draw an applicability is like really different. So the rho goes to 0. It's like drawing new ideas. So basically you're back to independent. So you not only need diffusion, this delta positive, you also need applicability sufficiently similar across the locations. So basically sigma bigger than theta. Okay, so that's what you need for correlation in productivity. And that will reflect in substitution patterns. So let me go there. So, so we are in a Ricardian world. So the patterns of trade come from what happened with the distribution of productivity, and a layer below what happened with diffusion and innovation, right? So the first thing is we have head-to-head competition. So the price in the destination just reflects the minimum cost source. So if you work all the nice qualities of the max stability, what you get in this case, it's expenditures that are in this GED class. And the shape of this expenditure comes entirely from the shape of the G function. So GL is the first derivative. Okay, so in particular, think about independence again. G is additive, so the derivative is 1. We're in CS. Okay, but then if we start putting curvature here, so we are getting away from CS. from CS expenditure. So basically, this, what happened, how far we are, how we move away from CS will tell us something about correlation, that in turn will tell us something about what's happening with diffusion and innovation. Oh, I have 6
Natalia, yeah, I was just about to say, you have 5 or 6 minutes left. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. So we can calculate the elasticity of substitution. So that's the object we're interested. So what we're going to do is first I characterize it in terms of the G function, and then in terms of this measure of ideas, this M function. Okay, so you can see clearly that we need this correlation and sharing of ideas for this for cross elasticities to be positive. So this is the elasticity. If we change the real weight in L prime, what happened with L? So these are two competing sources, China and Vietnam, say. So the own elasticity is minus theta. The cross elasticity is positive and is related to the curvature of the G function. Okay. So if, again, if we are in the independence case, that the G function is additive, this derivative is 0, this term is 0, we are left with minus theta, the own elasticity, and the cross elasticity is 0. So basically, IIA holds. But every time we go away and we have this curvature here, this is negative, we are going to have a cross elasticity that is positive. And that tells us that we are going away from CS, and IIA does not hold. So as I said, this is another way, I said on the previous slide, departures from CS arise from correlation in productivity across locations. Now, there is 2 points, and because I won't have time, I will show you these 2 points through an example. The same example as just showed you. So we want to link these expenditures to this underlying primitive to show 2 things. First, that diffusion leads to higher substitutability in expenditure. So you get those epsilons higher. Then that if we observe changes in these cross elasticities over time, they only reflect diffusion. Okay, so I'm going to show you that with the example of all or nothing diffusion. So remember, here is like ideas are not shared, they're born, they're in the place they're born, and then when they diffuse everywhere, right? And then this applicability, the assumption is also Fréchet with a sigma parameter, sigma shape. So you can write in that case, total expenditure share in this source country L as a part coming from non-diffuse ideas, the ones from innovation, and diffuse ideas. And here, and then we can calculate the elasticity. Okay. So again, this is the same data as before that tells us the rate of diffusion. So the own elasticity is going to be a mix of diffuse and non-diffuse ideas, and theta will have a weight on the non-diffuse. Remember, theta is the quality, the Pareto tail. The sigma is this applicability shape, and it's going to be weight in the diffuse ideas. And of course, it's related to the rho. I wrote it in terms of the sigma to make clear the role of sigma. And here is the cross elasticity. And again, it depends only on the share of diffused, the part of expenditure coming from the diffuse ideas, and the difference between the tail of the Pareto quality and the Fréchet applicability. So I want to make several points here. So if delta is 0, let's go again to that place. There is no diffusion, right? So the cross elasticity is 0. So the only way this elasticity change, conditional on wages, is because there is diffusion happening. So that's one part. So we're going to have a 0 here. The second part is is the case of sigma going to theta. Again, here is 0. But as sigma increases, given anything else, this elasticity should increase. And remember, sigma increasing means that idea applicability is more similar. Okay, it's thinner tail. So this elasticity goes up and up. And that happens because if applicability is very similar everywhere, right? We have very similar technologies. We're closer head-to-head competitors. And if we have a shock, substitution is much higher between those competitors. Okay, so yeah, so I think I'll stop here with my example. So those were the 2 points. So cross elasticities reflect only diffusion, the evolution of diffusion, and when we have higher sigmas, thinner tail applicability in this example, epsilon is bigger. Okay, there is more substitution. So there is really this two, again, this will be between innovation decreasing substitutability and diffusion increasing. So I'll finish here. We have a more general statement about this, but what we work with is a recurrent model of trade and knowledge flows in the spirit of EK, where head-to-head competition is a central piece of that. And again, our goal is to have these closed form solutions for many objects of the model. So through this applicability variable, we're able to distinguish between innovation and diffusion. Correlation arises because there is similarity in knowledge across locations, and this function M that reflects this the joint distribution of this applicability variable, you can think, as George asked, about many processes of diffusion and also innovation that can fit there. So basically, you can read our takeaway, our lesson is that there is more to be read from substitution patterns, observed substitution patterns. And you can learn about these unobserved flows that are related to knowledge dynamics. And in particular, non-CS expenditure should be, if expenditure is non-CS, it is an indication of there is diffusion of similar ideas. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Natalia. We're gonna now just kind of open up to general questions. If you have a question, you can raise your hand if you want, but it's easier just to unmute yourself and jump in.
Natalia, I was thinking about this prediction about increased substitutability, and it certainly, I kind of get it when it's like hold fixed washing machines, and then over time they're kind of spreading from US to Korea to China to Vietnam and becoming more substitutable. But then new stuff, that's maybe for a kind of old, a technology that's becoming older, but then new things are coming along which might not be very substitutable. Somehow I feel like your model would have the prediction that kind of aggregating over that, the substitutability is the same, but to get this prediction, you need to kind of follow one technology as it ages, sort of like following a cohort, which makes sense, but seems challenging empirically.
Yeah, we were thinking all the results I'll show you was more like take a cross section, and then you have the two flows, and then what you said about in a given point in time, you have more like newer ideas that are like more like not shared, and then older ideas that are shared, maybe because countries, say poorer countries, can adopt them better, right? So that is reflected in the weights given to these two parts of the measure of ideas, and then it translates in the example into expenditure, right? Over time, So far, the only claim we made over time is about, as I said, it's about this, it's like, because we have this result that, you know, only like the only way we share ideas is because there is diffusion, because their ideas are born in only one place. So that's kind of the identifying assumption to say that the evolution of these substitution patterns, the graph elasticity only reflects diffusion, because, as I said, in increases correlation, then increases head-to-head competition, and that reflects on higher elasticity. So that's kind of the, it was this slide I didn't have time to show, but that's the over time we say. But you are saying more like following a cohort of an idea, like the ideas born in T star and then like.
Yeah, the T star, right.
Yeah.
And say how they have, if they have a cycle, for instance, or something like that.
Yeah, Natalia, would you mind going back to the slide where you just start with the Q and the A on it very near the beginning? Because this is, by the way, I think this is really neat. I think you have a nice perspective on issues that we've been struggling with for a long time. So going back to Niels's comment, we could think of these Qs as just being buried in the ground, and they're just there. And you're giving them a distribution, and Neil said that's what's giving the underlying Frechet. Is that right? The Q.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that we can think of as time invariant. And then we think of these A's as evolving, right? Or over time, and they have a country feature to them. The V's don't. The Q. Oh.
This L, yeah, this is the location specific feature.
Location, right? So there's a location coming in, and that's moving over time. And the innovation then is when the A turns positive, right? Somewhere.
For the first time, yeah.
And then we have a joint distribution of the A's
Across cells.
across the L's after that. So what's the process of the A's, the innovation? What makes an A turn from 0 to not? Is it just a jump? And is it some Poisson process?
Yeah,
So
when-
you could,
Yeah, nails, yeah. I don't
Yeah, you can think
So
of it as
innovation
that.
here is A going from 0 to not 0.
Yep. And that could be, continuous. That could be a jump. It could be really, really anything. It depends on the particular model that you have in mind and how you want to, model the process of innovation and diffusion that will determine exactly how that happens. It could be a jump. It could be a continuous liftoff. It could be a lot of different things.
Okay, so Q, what is Q? What are we integrating over here? What is Q?
Where do you want me to go?
That
In the productivity.
Yeah. So when you say A goes from 0 to not 0, what is not 0? In the first instant, it becomes not 0.
Yeah. So for example, in the all or nothing example, right?
Yeah.
Basically, as soon as you know about the idea, you all of a sudden realize that there's this underlying draw of applicability that's just your level for the rest of the time for that idea, right?
And
So
could
it's
that
like-
be, like Sam had the intuition that these A's could be, I kind of like that thought too, that they're between 0 and 1.
Yeah.
1 is knowing the idea perfectly, but it would seem the joint distribution, think of a world without any diffusion. So only once one country discovers the idea, its probability is 0 that anybody else will know about it. Why is that world then totally driven by the Q distribution and not if there's some heterogeneity in where people start, why doesn't that contribute to the overall distribution?
So it does, but it gets reflected in the scale parameter, basically. Because in a world where every idea is concentrated in one place, there is a marginal distribution of applicability in that place. And the marginal distribution, if you will, of applicability everywhere else is degenerate on 0.
Yeah.
Right. So it's this very, very particular structure. And yeah, there's going to be some, distribution within that place, but there's no substitution across because
So that I see.
Yeah.
But what if let's say every country, there's the Q distribution that's for Shea, and then there's an innovative country where A goes from 0 to non-zero. And let's say non-zero is some other distribution that's not a scalar. It's another for Shea, or it's a Pareto, or it's a beta distribution or something, in Sam, I think a beta distribution would give you something between 0 and 1. But then why wouldn't the productivity frontier be some combination of the underlying Q distribution and the distribution of the innovative step?
So I think it is precisely, in the sense that the marginals are all for Shea, right? What matters is what it's going to be in the joint, right? So that whatever's going on with that beta, really, except for its effect on the T parameter. So you've got this T is this average of applicability, right, on just the marginal.
Oh, I see. So your fundamental assumptions are really about the marginals rather than the Q.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
That's right.
Okay.
The Q in some senses is just, it's what's driving the heterogeneity in the marginals. And that's
okay,
really all it's doing.
I should think about the primitive then as the top of this slide and not something about the Q.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the primitive, maybe put it this way, the M measure is really the state variable of the economy. And that is the applicability distribution, essentially.
Can I? Oh,
Right.
Sam, you want to finish? Right. So, I mean, this is very elegant, by the way. But so, what in the data? What tells us which world we are? I mean, you see, you're super free to choose productivities, correlations. I mean, it's kind of, how do you tell one process from the other, or one correlation structure from the other?
so there you need more assumptions. I mean, here what we say is like the structure with no more assumptions than this tells you if non-CS, then it means some diffusion, and if you see evolving cross-price elasticities, it's coming from diffusion. I think that if you wanna take the estimation step, then you will have to kind of work with a particular, with more assumptions on the M, basically, on the application.
You're saying you have to compute elasticities of cross-price elasticity substitution over time and see how they change.
So that will be your observable, and then the structure with some more, say, EK99, with some structure on exponential diffusion. That is
So you're saying basically you still have to make some parametric restrictions to be able to kind of like there are some versions of the model that cannot be distinguished from others, unless you make parametric assumptions, and then is this the idea?
That's kind of an open question, I think, is the fair statement. There was a point where I convinced myself the mapping from M to elasticities as a function was injective, and so you would not be able to invert in principle, but I'm not entirely sure. So we're not making any claim about a really strong identification result here. What we're making the claim is that under this sort of so much assumptions, this thing that we can observe and measure is related to something that is structurally interpretable.
Right.
And
but yeah, I think that's clear. Yeah, but say that you take two extreme versions of the world, that correlated and then non-correlated. Can you distinguish this in the data if you had this is the yeah. So one of those worlds has 0 cross-price elasticities. The cross-price elasticity gives you at least that. Okay, good.
Could I actually have a related question, maybe also a suggestion? The question is, Nelson, sorry, by the way, this is really neat. I think the question is, can your M aggregator somewhat depends on the observables? I know you have a lot of randomness in the A. What I have in mind is like, a parallel literature like R&D spillover, for instance, people, a lot of that, back to what Costa's asking, a lot of that using the pattern citations. And then it's sort of like you have an observable structure upfront that they will take as given, and then they put in this randomness. I don't know whether here you have a very flexible general structure. I've been wondering how you're gonna tell us, what is that general enough to incorporate some kind of pre-structure of the observables? And then maybe what I have in mind is like, you have a very powerful result that these translate into substitution patterns, but these substitution patterns could potentially depend on some observed ex ante connection or network structure that might actually improve your identification power for your model mechanisms. I don't know, this is the first question. The second question I have is, maybe this is totally clarifying. Is your A have any, do you allow your A have any path dependence in a way that, should I understand them just randomly popping up in each of the location? Or it's sort of related, right? In my mind, you were giving like example of like China and Vietnam, which sort of the spatial pattern matters here. Is that general enough to incorporate that, or there's no path dependence, then just like thinking about them as like geographical or just randomly popping up just over time? This is just a clarifying question, to understand the model better.
It can be unrestricted over time, right? Yeah, so the quick answer is yes, it can have path dependency.
Kind of path dependence, okay.
Yeah. And I think that going back to your first question, and maybe also Costa's, here is more like we are telling you that with a very this is very mild conditions, very minimal conditions on a function M, you have these kind of stark results about what CS, not CS, where diffusion should show up. I think from there you can go to more like, for instance, linking to observables. As I said, you can think of the exponential case of bilateral diffusion, where that happens because of proximity or something like that. I think that the new point, for instance, taking EK99 is like for instance, you chose the pattern of the path of going and look at patterns, right? To trying to disentangle knowledge dynamic. And we're saying, well, actually there was a lot of information in trade flows. So with that structure, precisely that structure at trade, and then you can say something, about those diffusion lags and objects of the model that read from substitutions. I need to think, unless Nels has a better answer about the network. The network is like, yeah, I need to think exactly what it means.
Well, so the one thing is the structure that we presented here is kind of trying to get directly at the applicability thing as the fundamental, but that's really a random variable that could be coming from lots of things, right? And there is a slightly more general way of setting this up where things are actually not just sufficient, but necessary, that involves some variables that we don't really know what they are. But in principle, those could be any observable. So for example, you end up with this background space of idea characteristics, which could literally be the text of the patent document. And so, you know, if you've got data on text of patent documents and you want to identify patents with ideas, in principle, you could directly feed that information into this equation for the correlation function and sort of integrate across text using some machine learning thing, I guess, right? So in principle, you know, the framework accommodates a lot more richness that would let you incorporate observable information. And we're just sort of abstracting from that for the sake of really just, you know, keeping things clean and interpretable in the structure here.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that answers my question. Then you're literally saying it's general enough to actually incorporate those. Okay.
Yeah. And another thing I will say, and this is kind of related to Kostas's question. So there is a notion of minimality in the representation here. So it's using this max stable stuff. It's like the spectral theorem. And there's a notion of minimal representations where they are actually unique. So there are results. I just double checked. I pulled up the lit folder. There is a result that says that if you have a max stable process that satisfies a certain continuity, basically stochastic, a separability condition, then there exists a representation in this world that is unique. Essentially, there is a unique distribution for applicability that rationalizes the stochastic process for productivity. So I think that addresses sort of the identifiability question, right? So we know basically that means any demand system with gross substitutes, so positive cross partials, right, is going to be able to be rationalized here. So therefore, it's going to accommodate a lot of different kinds of data you could incorporate. And I think that identification result will go through from that.
That's
result.
interesting. I mean, one other thing, I'm sorry, I couldn't come the first 20 minutes or so, but it's exactly how you define substitution, right? Because the price data is the continuum of prices. You know, is it substitution good by good or like the aggregate good? You know, so that's kind of tricky in this type of perfect competition models, I guess. But I understand the point. This is a nice point.
So this is a really interesting discussion. It's some of it's beyond me. So I just want to kind of get back to like, you know, in the end, this is all about like how substitutable, how trade responds to some sort of change in some sort of trade policy or shock. And it, you know, it seems to me like what you're kind of telling us is with this diffusion that you know, everyone's kind of closer, so everything's more substitutable, right? But I guess if I really wanted to look for diffusion, why would I only look in trade flows? Why wouldn't I just look in like, you know, income differences across countries? It seems like that's the, you know, if everyone's quickly able to copy me, then there should be no variation in income in the world. And that seems like the direct thing to look for. And there's just so many other things that are kind of driving elasticities at different horizons that I kind of worry about looking at it, you know, in this way. And maybe, you know, one last vote, like maybe coming back to Sam's comment in the very beginning is like kind of looking at patterns of you know, industry kind of introduction and like, you know, how products kind of then, you know, the product life cycle is kind of the more direct way of kind of getting at this. So I don't know, maybe that was just kind of a set of comments that, and I think the technical stuff is super neat, but in the end, it was, you started out by telling us about elasticities, right? And it just seemed like this was kind of an indirect way at getting why we're kind of substituting so quickly, or actually not even, or maybe not quickly enough, right? So.
Yeah, I think that maybe is again, it's related to Nels's comment about the injection mapping or not. I mean, it's like from the elasticities, reading something about diffusion and innovation that are always difficult to get at. And of course, people have tackled like through patents and other stuff. So the new element here will be to say, well, actually, you can use this these elasticities. We know how to estimate them. Many people estimate them really well. And maybe even like see like how they reconcile with the estimates that comes from patents or other measures of diffusion that we have. Is if you can put the point is that they should be reconciled. The model reconciles them. So is that true in the data can tell you that you're using the right model of diffusion or innovation? Maybe not. I mean, it's kind of you can think also like a validity test.
Yeah. Let me try it like a slightly different way, which is, there's two elasticities that people care about. One is a trade elasticity and the other is an Armington elasticity, right? The Armington elasticity kind of controls for price effects. That's what the macro guys would do. They say the exchange rate moves by a certain amount, and then we get some price adjustments. And the trade elasticity says, well, let's change tariffs and let's not worry about like how the prices respond endogenously to the tariffs through whatever mechanisms. In some sense, I feel like if we're really controlling for the difference in technology, that we should be able to. You should somehow be picking it up in like the Armington elasticity, right? Because these guys are, what you're really telling us is there's something else that we're not controlling for, which is that these guys are really, really similar in technology. And that's leading their prices, small movements in prices, small movements in tariffs having like a really, really big movement in kind of, the relative price. I don't know, maybe that's not the right parallel. I'm kind of struggling, so I should sort of sign off.
No, what's the Armington elasticity?
No, if you think about like the Armington elasticity and like in the macro literature would be like you change the relative price and how does relative trade flows respond? And in like any kind of trade model, like where there's kind of some endogenous response to like the tariff, you change the tariff and then prices change, and then trade also changes, but the prices can also change in response to. This might not be the right parallel. So
I think I know what you're getting at, George. It's like, so like in this framework that we're working in, we're implicitly assuming complete pass-through, say, of like a tariff change in prices, for example. But that need not be the case. So you could think about, well, if we observed a price change, what is the substitution? Versus if we see a tariff change, what is the substitution? And those could potentially be different. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's kind of like the, whatever, it could be endogenous markups, it could be lots of things, right?
Well, I'm also feeling like there's just something you're not controlling for if we looked at it in a slightly different way. But I need to form it a little bit better. So thanks for humoring me.
I mean, in the other paper, what we say basically, we call it like an equivalence result, because we say, oh, give me any generalized extreme value demand system, one that you get from preferences with Armington, say, from the Armington model. I don't know, cross-nested CS, whatever. So we can always, there is always like an equivalent Ricardian model with some correlation in productivity that gives you that. So I don't know if that helps, but yeah, the difference between I never thought about that in that way, that prices versus tariffs. Yeah.
I mean, I guess what's nice about your example of the washing machines is it's very compelling that the reason we substituted across Korea and China and Vietnam was because it's the same technology and they just moved it around. And that's a very different way of thinking than something about we like to buy Korean washing machines, because this was an example where, but there may be other things where there's something about Korea, they do something that is not shared. And then in fact, it's more like we do like Korean something or other. So I think it is kind of nice, that example of getting you to think very tangibly about this technologies being shared as kind of an underlying force of substitution, which seems to be kind of your theme, that you can think about. I mean, it may not, the other ones would not be so compelling, but there are going to be some where it really makes sense to think about it that way. I guess that's what
So it's funny, like, and Niles brought it up in our discussions, like writing the previous paper. It's like, so if you go to all the McFadden literature, because the GB tools are from the random utility models, right? And it's about taste and utility, right? So when there is a paper that uses these max table processes, but applied to utility, and it wasn't like a very cited paper or anything. I mean, it's kind of obscure because it's difficult to interpret these primitives in like a taste world. But if you go to the Ricardian world, they have a very natural interpretation of technologies and elements of technologies, like the applicability, etc. So I think that moving to the Ricardian world, you always can have like a layer of taste and put an upper elasticity that comes from like you can aggregate, and then that's the taste elasticity, and maybe that's why you like more goods coming from one place than the other. But really, I think like the results show off, like have economic meaning when you put them in a Ricardian setup. That's why they didn't go much like farther when they use the random utility, the room models.
Just to, I mean, I think all these discussions are connected. Like there are two things, there are two substitutions in your models, like good by good and the aggregate trade. And again, I'm sorry, I missed the beginning, so I cannot say exactly how you distinguished it, but potentially you can use both to separate the models or something like that. But the one is what George was saying. I thought what George was saying, like the Armington, the sigma, like the good by good. But of course, there's selection patterns and all this stuff in your model. And the other is how the aggregate flows are shaping when you drop some producers, other countries that producers. So that I couldn't see exactly how you distinguish these two in the presentation, but maybe I missed it.
Yeah, I mean, this also kind of relates to what George's question about, like, what, why not do something more direct, right, with the technologies or something like this? Well, because, it's nice to measure things at the macro level and have some representative data, so you kind of get a sense of like what is in some sense the aggregate fact versus what you would get from using price variation at the very fine product level. And getting a framework where we can think about both of those together and how they would interact, I think is a part of what we're trying to do here precisely. Yeah.
Sorry, could I add that my overall impression is that, back to what George was asking, possibly giving guys a tough question, is like, you seems like you're not battling. I agree a lot with Sam. I think you're not battling on the advantage of a model. I feel like your model's key advantage here, at least for this model. I know you have an earlier paper which focused a lot on the cross-sectional stuff. I think your strength here is over time. And this very nice feature of like over time, if you're holding a certain vintage or certain variety, that's kind of like spanning over time. And if you think about the substitution is actually changing over time, if you really can do that well, I think that's going to actually answer a lot of what George was answering, answer his questions. Well, it seems like your answer being so focused on the cross-section, you're going to still think about equivalence. Then it's not very, my feeling is like when you start to really take that seriously to data, a lot of things going to work against you because it's never that clean about what is a variety. And are we going to always be clean about whether it's coming from diffusion or come from product differentiation? I think there's a lot of challenging things going on there. So I've been wondering whether you could think more about, so that's my general impression. It's really a quick impression, although just to add here.
I wanted to mention a couple of things. I agree with George that more data on different things would be very informative. Patents, royalties, innovation, kind of co-mean long-term data. But those data, Cordova and I have worked with patent data. They're beautiful in some dimensions. They're very messy in others. Trade data are really rich. I have a student who did a third-year paper that was totally inspired by Nils and Natalia's earlier paper, where he just grouped countries into areas that you thought would probably be sharing technology more, like East Asia, Europe. And then he simulated your model with different rows at a variety level and aggregated to product levels, and got the implication that at the observable product level, that more correlation, a bigger row would mean more correlation in the product level market shares. And that gave him identification into the theta versus the rho under the assumption, and it did, in his a priori groupings, did seem to have countries where this substitutability was greater. So getting to Kostas's point, I think there is something observable here about, in the trade data, about this distinction.
One more thing for Daniel is like, the thing is like, yes, this level of goods, the V in these models, I mean, I don't know where it is in the data really, right? You need to go for simulations or something like that. So this G function, I'll show you very quickly the cross-nested example, right? But this cross-nested example, this is kind of a sectoral model. So you can think of a model where you have these nests and you start with the most disaggregated. You can think of firms, maybe if you have firm data, and going the level up and building the correlation, and then backing up the model of diffusion. And I mean, there is always a representation, right? Because I mean, this is a G function. It's just that the nests, I mean, we can pair it with data sectors, and so we have very rich elasticities, blah, blah, blah. But in principle, I think that can be that. But it's true, you mentioned these things about product differentiation and those forces that, of course, they're not, I think, present in these models.
But I'll add, let me add, like, I was kind of thinking what Daniel was thinking too, but along the lines, like Adao, Cosino, and Donaldson, right? They basically did the BLP product differentiation model on trade flows. And so that's like a model that can get interesting cross price elasticities. And then, I don't know, you tell me.
Yeah, they use mixed CS.
Yeah, mixed CS. And then, so the question is like, how do you, yeah, so the question is like, how do you, I think what you guys is super interesting because it is connecting these elasticities with economics, with the innovation problem. But
so
the question is like, how do we kind of, you know, I mean, maybe it's a bigger problem. I mean, and again, like what Daniel Zhu was exactly saying is like the time series seems to be the dimension to lever on this, but it's, you know, the fact that there's I could just like put a mixture in there and fit these cross price elasticities. What's wrong with that?
No, that's fine. Mixed CS it's like it's in this class. It's a subclass of the GV. So I should put another bullet here. An example is mixed CS. Actually, we could work that and work the expenditures and work all the way up to the expenditures. Yeah.
In terms of like, in terms of an empirical implementation, one could very well just take ACD off the shelf, run the BLP procedure, estimate a bunch of stuff, and then what this theory tells you is everything you've just estimated can potentially, you can use those estimates to back out things about the underlying diffusion dynamics in principle. So that would be like the estimating equation, so to speak, to uncover these objects.
So I guess the summary, let me just like recap this. So the summary is like, this does fit in that class. And then the way to interpret the mixed CS and then the parameters that they are recovering is you can find an innovation process that would rationalize that.
Exactly.
I see. I mean, it's still the question is like, could it just be about taste kind of thing? I mean, that kind of is like Sam's kind of interesting point about this. Like, you know, you put the tariff on, you know, the US puts the tariff on balsamic vinegar from Italy, and it's just hard to substitute away from that. But you know, the washing machines, it's like
Yeah, exactly. You have supply and demand. You know, you just need an IV. That's what. At the end of the day, that's what we're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and price data, right? That's really the. If
Yeah.
we're just restricting to expenditure data, I mean, there's no way to separate these stories, right?
Can I like come back to the washing machines a second? Just, I mean, it's what you guys led with, which is, you know, we saw, I mean, there's with all these movements and tariffs, all of a sudden, like maybe not all of a sudden, but first we shifted to China. We kept Mexican washing machines around, and then, you know, then with the second set, we shifted to I guess Vietnam. That seems impossible that you could have shipped that quickly, but you know, suppose you did. So, you know, it looks like there's some substitution that's kind of, you know, you're getting more substitution over time, right? Do we think that more substitution is coming from diffusion, or actually firms making investments in like relocating factories? And how do you want to think about, you know, and that's like a costly process, right? So how do we want to think about, you know, those two things?
So we think about multinationals as diffusion. That's the cheap answer.
Yeah, but they're really making investments, right? They gotta, there is some capital that needs to be relocated. There's some new supply chains that need to be established. There's stuff that has to happen, and you don't do it kind of overnight. And it's, you know, it's very, it's not diffusion in the sense that like it's not directed. It's directed like investment. And so I guess I'm trying to understand, like, you know, if you had backed out an elasticity out of these, like, how would we interpret that elasticity? It's just that these kind of, the tariff went up, and all of a sudden, like, China started getting like lucky shocks, right? That where it got this lucky diffusion. Is that how I want to think of it?
Oh, I thought you were just going to say that because of the ability to understand the technology in Vietnam as in China, that substitutability was possible. And although you're right that the investments went in, it's not like they're suddenly being produced in Bangladesh. You know, there's something special about Vietnam. So even though your point is good, it seems like they also have this other point about where it's even possible that seems also first order.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you agree?
Yeah, no, exactly. So like it's like, you know, at that moment in time, there were the investments that were made in the past, which from the sort of model perspective is the diffusion that happened in the past that made it possible, right? And then, you know, maybe, you know, a couple of years in the future, you build you know, you figure out how to set up that factory in Bangladesh and transfer the technology. Maybe the firm finds it profitable to go set that up, right? But at least in the short run, that hasn't happened yet, right? So.
But George, really, like the way we treat multinational in all our models is like this perfect diffusion almost. So it's really that. It is, if I say it's like they're a channel for diffusion of ideas. That's it. And I think like many of the bigger and bigger substitution you see in the world has to do with that. It's not just a coincidence. Because here, I mean, it's Whirlpool, and then here Whirlpool had to come back and through the US. I mean, it's like, you know.
No, I agree. I mean, it's just a question of what investments, you know, how we think about the process to accomplish that diffusion, right? Like, is it a costly process? Is it, you know, a magical process?
No, it is. In fact, in our kind of mechanical term, that imagine you don't have, if everybody's not educated, right? I mean, you get this idea that nobody is like having it's A equals to 0. So you could think about a Nelson Phelps type of diffusion process that requires some human capital, and then only when you achieve a minimum level, you can adopt ideas, right?
Yep.
But that's all built on the, again, that's why it's so kind of parsimonious. You can start thinking about all these on days, your investments, and put like choices and firms that choose that make conscious decisions. That.
Great.
Thanks for the comments.
Yeah, thanks, Ruben.
I guess we lost Kim, so I'll call it. This was a really stimulating discussion. It was great to hear everything Natalia and Nelson and everyone who pitched in. So
thanks
hope
for the
everyone
opportunity.
stay safe. We'll see everyone next week, hopefully. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Right.